everyone, and welcome to the Jeff Buller Show. Today I have with me Bill Woolsey. Now, Bill is the president and founder of FiveTwo, a network that equips entrepreneurs to launch a variety of sustainable startups, helps people with faith-based businesses, and we'll have a little chat about that soon. Bill began leading FiveTwo in 2015 when they launched a Mother Teresa meets a friendly Mark Cuban training process that helps entrepreneurs, leaders to grow non-profits and startups and make a difference in financially sustainable ways. So he's also the author of 7 Steps to Start, and we'll have a quick overview of that as well. We'll find out what those 7 steps are. So Bill, I'm really looking forward to having a chat because the mission of my side is how to win at business and life, and it sounds like what you're trying to do with startups, with faith-based businesses, is to do that in a Christian faith-based context. So great to have you on the show, and you're from Austin, Texas.
Yes, I'm from Austin, and you're from Sydney, so we're just a tad apart.
Yeah, well, I think we're socially distancing quite well, frankly. So people will be smiling on us and going, "Yes, good on you, Jeff and Bill. You're being good boys." So yeah. So Bill, tell me how you got into a faith-based business startup.
Well, Jeff, I have been a pastor since 1987, and my role in the churches that I served in before my family and I founded a church in West Houston. So for 9 years, I was always the guy who was evangelism pastor. I was out and about. I was in the community, and always enjoyed that. My mother was a serial entrepreneur, real estate broker, pottery business, etc. So I kind of grew up in that setting of, gosh, I don't know, take charge of your own destiny, but also love people and love being with people. So then in 97, my family and I were asked to start a church in West Houston. It was the right place, right time. Everything was perfect, and it came together. It grew into a very large multi-site church. And in that, we started working with church planters who were starting churches in the U.S. and realized very quickly it's a very hard job to start things, especially when you're trying to build that momentum and let people know what you're doing. And then when you're trying to help people, not just, make money to the bottom line, there's this altruistic part that oftentimes people don't trust. And so we started working with them, but then about 3 years in, realized that there was this whole slice of people out there, Christian people of deep faith who want to live out their faith. And oftentimes Christians think the only way you do that is if you're a pastor or some professional church worker, or on Sundays. But they were trying to figure that out. And then when you marry that up with entrepreneurs and it's hard and they're trying to figure that out, that's when we started really focusing on those individuals. And in 2015, the network had grown. I could no longer lead both things. I went all in leading FiveTwo. And so that's how I got to where we are today in training Christian men and women to launch new ventures that help people. That's really what we do.
Okay. So you mentioned church planters. Okay, so explain what you mean by a church planter.
A church planter is an individual who starts a church from scratch. Sometimes what we would call parachute in. So in other words, they move into an area and it's just them and maybe their family. Other times they may take a group of people with them. Sometimes they'll take a group from an existing church. But regardless, their goal is to start a new church. And depending upon the denomination or the Christian group you come from, your support may be nothing at all. You may have to be like a worker priest where you've got to get a side job while you're doing this. Or you may come in with a lot of money and a lot of backing, and you almost approach it more like a business startup, which was how we started the church in West Houston. We approached it like a business in many principles. We had an operating line of credit. We started with 7 families, and then we were off to the races. So how you approach that, there's just a slew of ways you can go about it. But at the end of the day, you're trying to start a sustainable congregation of Christian people who are there to make a difference in that community.
So essentially, it's starting a church is like starting a startup. It's like starting a business.
There are many similarities, and that's why our process that we use, our Start New process, is built around a business model canvas process, which is an entrepreneurial tool developed in the mid to late 2000s. So we take that process that comes out of the entrepreneurial world and we apply it to starting nonprofits or for profits, but all faith based, including churches. All the principles work. You're applying different ingredients, obviously, and your faith is playing a more central role, perhaps, than someone else's.
So your faith is really a philosophical base that you operate from.
It's a worldview,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
It's who's in charge and where are they, and what's the provision and all of that kind of stuff. Same principles would apply, you might say.
Cool. So you said you're using this canvas or template for starting a business. Is that the same as your 7 steps to start?
7 Steps to Start is a book we wrote back when I went all in 2015, and the canvas that we use, it's a 9-paneled canvas. It's actually open source. People in the startup world tend to know of a business model canvas approach, but we took it and we applied principles coming out of the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 to that canvas. My book, 7 Steps to Start, are some of the principles that we then put throughout the course at different parts of the course. And it is something that we suggest you read, and we have a couple activities around that as well.
All right, cool. So maybe we could touch on those 7 canvases, if you like. Are you happy to step us through that?
Sure. The canvas or the book? You want to go? Where would you like to go?
Let's have a look at the canvas first.
Okay, super. So the canvas itself is 9 panels, and it begins with who are you trying to serve? Who are you reaching? In secular terms, you'd say, who's your customer? Most of the time when people come to us and they want to start, I'll just use an example, a coffee shop, they've never thought about who that's for. And so we start, first of all, with who it's for.
Yep.
And that customer, and we really want them to understand their pains, their gains, their jobs, what they're trying to do. We also have a lot of job theory, if you're familiar with that understanding. So we really walk through that with them. Then what is the value proposition? What value are you going to bring them? The next block on that canvas is what is the relationship that you want to be about, or what do they want that relationship to look like with you? Then what are the channels? So you do a lot of, your whole business is very much geared to social media, World Wide Web kind of channel, which I would guess, though, at times you're also presenting face-to-face in conferences and things like that. Most of the people we're working with are not social media-based organizations. They're more local-based. And so they've got to really determine what are the channels they're going to be sharing and bringing that value to the person to. Yep. And then your income streams. We're very big on, even if you're a nonprofit, to have an earned income stream as well as a donative income stream. So we teach you how to fundraise and cash flow and those kind of things. On the other side of the canvas, you might say behind the curtain, which is what people don't see, you have your core activities you've got to be about, your core resources, your partnerships, and then obviously your cost structure and how you're going to structure that financially. So that canvas, you might say, it's a snapshot of the business model that you're creating. It's the forerunner before a business plan, but you've got to get it all set to make sure you've got this great connection between what you're offering is something that the person you want to serve or reach or care for or produce for, whatever, they really want. So that's our canvas process that we work through with people.
All right, cool. Yeah, so you got to get very clear on who your customer is, and then work out what their pain points are, then solve that and generate revenue out of that to make a difference.
That is correct. And when you're in a nonprofit, you have a couple different customers. One of your customers is your donor, because you're trying to bring value to that donor where it's a transaction oftentimes with them. They're giving you dollars and you're giving them something back. And the greater or the larger the gift, the more that donor tends to look at it as a return on investment, because they could give that money anywhere. So how are they making a difference? And so when you're in a nonprofit, you have to also think about that donor as a customer, not just a partner. And then obviously there is the particular individual that is either purchasing or using your services, if you're fee for service, whatever it may be, in your community.
So tell me what a donor would look like. What's a typical donor?
A donor in a nonprofit is someone who shares your cause and your values. So people join organizations based upon values. They usually do it subconsciously. They don't realize that's why they're joining. And in a church setting or even in a business setting, when they walk in, values live and breathe through the atmosphere, through the culture that is present in that organization. So people like, it's like a sixth sense kind of thing. They're like, this feels good. This feels like me. And then they hear from you and that sounds like me. Well, donors are an articulation of that. They resonate with what you're trying to accomplish. They may or may not resonate with how you're trying to accomplish it, but at the end of the day, they believe that you can pull it off. People give money to people, and so they believe that your cause is of value, that you are trustworthy, and they want to support your cause, and they're going to donate to you.
So even though it's a feeling, is there any data that basically say, okay, so we've started this business, so we're giving money to the church, for example. So if you're giving that money, is there sort of like, okay, I want X out of this, or is it more they can? Do you provide data for those donors?
Oh, definitely. You constantly, when you're raising funds, typically we have kind of a formula that we encourage you to use. When you're raising funds, first of all, the person that you're requesting dollars from, inviting to participate with you, because really you're inviting them to join with you in this mission, in this cause. You're going to tell them a story. You're going to tell them a story. So you're going to use story as a way to help them see what it is their dollar is going to do. But you also want to make sure that if you're going to tell them a story about one particular person, how many of those people their dollars are going to impact.
Yep.
So part of the commitment or the contract you've made with donors is also to report back to them, so that there are objective stats on what impact that their dollar made. So yes, for sure, stats, reports, numbers, data, that's all very critical when it comes to donor development.
So, all right. So, in terms of the way your churches operate as well as donors, is there any sort of tithe-based donation principles as well? Because
so you're coming out of a background, you actually know the word tithe. Not everybody does.
Yeah, well, just to my listeners and viewers, is something you may not know about me. I was raised as Seventh-day Adventist, so it was very important that as part of that,
yes,
donating to support the church, and a lot of the church revenue was driven out of tithing, which is done a lot, especially in America, with fundamentalist churches still a lot, I believe.
Yes, yes.
And tithing typically is a number of 10% of your income you give to the church. So that's why I know the term tithing. So
depending upon the background you come from, and depending upon the congregation you're a part of, you may or may not hear tithe in the vocabulary of that congregation. And the congregations I led and the denomination that I come out of, which is the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, tithe is a principle. It's something I always taught. It's something my family and I've always practiced. We routinely give away and have at least 14% of the income that we receive. It's very hard to, I believe, it's very hard to ask somebody to tithe when you don't do it. And, when you don't live it out, you don't believe in it. There's a beautiful promise in Malachi 3:16, which is a book in the Old Testament, that
Yep.
God says, bring it into the storehouse, trust me in this, and I will bless you. And I can stand in front of you and say that God has blessed me and my family with more things and more friendships and more relationships that have actually resulted in some wonderful financial blessings
Mm.
that, I guess if I put a number to how much money we've given away to the church and to congregations, to nonprofits over the years, I I think I could have probably a nice slew of cars in my garage or something, whatever. But so it is a principle in some congregations. You referred to the fundamentalist churches. At times, it can be used as a battering ram, as a
Mm-hmm.
hammer, as a legalistic thing, and that's not its intention.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I do find it interesting. Jesus spoke more about money than he spoke about any other topic in the New Testament. And that's because money is so near and dear to us. And, the warning out of the Bible is to not let it rule you and
Mm-hmm.
to not let it become your God, your passion. And which is exactly what in your business and your purpose is, to really improve people's life, not just through money, but their whole well-being.
Mm.
And so money is a part of your life. It's always going to be. We say when we work with nonprofits, money is not the mission, but where there's no money, there's no mission.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to pay attention to that. But the question is it your why, or
Mm-hmm.
is there another why of which money is important?
Yeah. Yeah, tithing's a very interesting thing. I certainly preached from the pulpit as a teenager. I left the faith when I was about 27, and I had a conversation with my father about that because it was quite a big deal for me. And I suppose because the church I was raised in no longer matched my philosophy on life that had evolved. And I suppose the phrase I said to my dad, I would call myself spiritual, not religious. In other words, I said, the God I know now is much bigger than the one I grew up with. So that was a decision that I made at 27 consciously, but spiritual, living a spiritual life, it's one has meaning. I think it's really, really important. I think for me, atheism as a real problem, and it's a life without any meaning at all, and so I struggle with that. But I'm certainly of the belief now that everyone should have their own beliefs, and we're not here necessarily to change other people, but I think the first job is to change ourselves. Because if you're going to put all your hope in basically changing everyone else to make you happy, I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge, because you're going to be everyone's whim.
That is definitely going to be a bit of a challenge. I think if you're, what is your goal? And Jesus would say, you boil it down to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Mm-hmm. It's to approach and love. It's also, though, to realize that there are standards, and God has standards. And, if you just ignore that, we would never ignore that in other parts of life. Why would we ignore that, in something that's important, spiritual? And I tell people, if your goal is to quote unquote, always convert somebody, like a notch in your belt, then I question if that's a motivation of love.
Yeah.
At the same time, if it's important to you, right? If I just bought a brand new car that I love, I go tell everybody about it. If I'm going to have a child and I'm so excited I've never had a child, I'm going to tell everybody about it. So it is frustrating a little bit to me that we have said, but you can't tell me about your faith. You can't tell me about your God. Well, that says to me, that's a weird dichotomy. So why is that? Are we afraid? If a Muslim tells me about his God, sure, tell me. I'd love to hear. So it's just interesting that dynamic we're in some of our cultures today.
Yeah, totally. And I think letting one have their own belief and be willing to share it, no matter what that belief is.
Yeah,
I
that's
think,
right.
Okay, and I think that is really, really important. And I was brought up in a church which was pretty well focused on a lot of judgment, little bit more Old Testament than New Testament. Some people might
Yeah.
understand that.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and so I've actually had to do a fair bit of unlearning over the
Hmm.
years in terms of letting go of judgment and continuing to do so.
Hmm.
So anyway,
That's a real quick. That's a very interesting thought, Jeff, because there have been a number of studies. One of them tracks back to how grace filled your dad is. And that there's such a huge weight in that father figure in our lives, in our psyches. And so much of Christianity can have a legalistic strain to it
Mhm.
that says you've got to perform to be loved and accepted. And that's just simply not at all what Christianity says. Jesus doesn't say that. Nobody, but yet we've imposed that because we're so driven people. We want to perform at everything. And to think I've got to perform also for God makes some sense in some weird kind of way. And we just go there and it goes off the rails.
Mm. Yeah, it's the word love is certainly very important rather than judgment.
Slightly.
Yeah, exactly. So let's have a quick look at your book. You said it's basically the 7 steps to start, which you used as, I suppose, the pillars, I suppose, of the of FiveTwo, which is what you started in 2015. So would you like to step us through those 7 steps? Because I think some of them are pretty relevant for people that want to start a business, or they want to start a faith-based business like you're doing, or help people with. So your first step in that book is know your passion.
Hmm. Yeah. As I was learning more about you and your passion, which is all over the pages of your website, right? And it's all there. What people often don't appreciate how what they're passionate about affects everything in their life. And until they really can articulate it and they can grasp it, it's not as powerful or as momentum creating. It's certainly not as team building or as movement causing as when you do understand it. So we always encourage, when people come to us again and they want to start something, we tell them, hey, that's fantastic. Let's set it aside. Let's really get to know what your passions are, and particularly who are you passionate for. So when you wake up in the morning, if we can get you working in your passion, serving in your passion, nobody has to crack the whip, nobody has to motivate you. You're self-motivated. And especially in a faith-based orientation, that's going to look like somebody. That's going to be focused on someone. Maybe it's underserved children. A number of the things we've helped launch. Communities of underserved people, women in prostitution in Detroit, uh, indigenous moms who are going to be having their children in Detroit and Flint, Michigan, homeless, the whole homeless population in Mesa outside of Phoenix, Arizona, Hmong children, Hmong, so children from Hmong families who have immigrated into the U.S., but their parents still want them to know the Hmong culture and the language. So Hmong language school, something we help start. So all those kind of things, they all have to do with the passion and who you're passionate for. Once you know that and you've really articulated that and clarified that, you can start building the rest around it.
Mm. Yeah, that's very interesting about that. And I've done a lot of reflection since I started my blog, which was just a passion project initially.
You called it was in the lab, so it was a lab
Yeah,
rat
that's right.
or something.
It was an experiment that escaped the lab.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
right.
What's interesting about on reflection for me, along this, about purpose and passion, is that when I saw social media in the good old days, I'm going to call it the good old days of social media.
Just a decade ago or so.
That's right. What I loved about it was its ability to connect people and tribes from around the world that had similar interests, and it could do it at scale. It also provided the means to distribute people's ideas, your creation to the world globally. So I was excited by that. For me, it was really just this amazing technology enabling humanity to be better humans. Now, what's happened in those last 10 to 12 years is that the social experiment has sort of, some of it's been weaponized.
Yeah, that's a good word.
And as with any technology being used for good or for evil, and I use this analogy quite often, is that Nobel created dynamite to actually build quarries and do mining, but then it was weaponized to be a weapon of war. And I think that's why he started the Nobel Peace Prize, because for him, I think he felt that what he'd created was not what he intended. And I see that a little bit with social media today. I think that the bad actors have got in, and it doesn't mean it's still not used for good. In fact, it's used for good all the time. But that's the challenge with any technology. It can be used for good or for evil. And I think we all need to have our voice to it. I just can't believe that people use social media to basically tear other people down, and that's done at scale. It's just if you've got nothing good to say, don't say it, right? And to see people torn down publicly and in all sorts of areas is just, for me, I'm just horrified by where it's gone. I went and spoke at the World Youth Forum in Egypt about 2 years ago, and there was a panel hosted by the president of Egypt, and there was two sides to it, and said, is social media for good or is social media for bad? And of course, I'm an eternal optimist, and I said, well, for me, social media has been an amazing tool, and to help me grow, to be able to share my ideas in their imperfection, and also to make incredible connections around the world. And for you, the church is a fantastic.
Yep.
It's where
great example.
It's a great idea of networking. It's a tribe of like-minded people that have the same mission and purpose. But on the other side, there was those that talked about it. A lot of those were academics. It's not very, social media isn't all good, and that's true. It's not. And I think some of the downsides of social media, for example, is it can be an incredible narcissistic tool. It's about look at me instead of drastically trying to make a difference. And young people can be hurt by that because, and I love the phrase that a friend of mine shared with me a while back, is that with social media, we often judge our insides by the outsides of others. And what that means that means is that people are only putting their polished versions of themselves online. Look at me, aren't I fantastic? Look at my nice car, look at my nice clothes, aren't I beautiful? Don't I look good in this bikini? I'm not talking about myself on that, of course.
Thankfully.
But the reality is that there is a downside to this social media experiment we're running, and I think we certainly need to bring it a little bit under control, and we're having those discussions now, and might mean we need some regulation around social media. So anyway, it's an interesting spot, but yeah, that for me, that social media, the discovery of it is this intersection of humanity and technology that helps us to scale our best selves, is how I saw it. And so yeah, totally get where, and once you tap into that purpose, it's almost like you've got a nuclear engine attached to you.
That's correct, because we talk about it in our tribe, in our network. It's your divine wiring. Okay. So values are put in you usually through relationships, through experiences you had, events, and they work themselves out in emotions. So you can actually kind of get a sense of what is important to you by when you get angry. When somebody crosses a line, they've crossed a value. And so when you start to understand that, you're really understanding more clearly of how God wired you and how he created you, and through circumstances, what it may be. And so now all of a sudden, as you said, your nuclear engine, your rocket it it just becomes laser focus. You start to see, I understand. And then when you start to say, what am I passionate about? Who would I, if I poured into this individual, this group of people, I would grow infinitely as well. I would grow exponentially. All right. So when I'm in my purpose, when I'm doing what I'm designed to do, it's a wonderfully fulfilling way to live.
Absolutely. And for me, over a decade on, I'm a totally different person than where I was then. And
Mm-hmm.
for me, it's not a destination. I've heard people say, well, I should have arrived. I've sold my business. I should be happy now. I've got everything that I dreamed of. And going, you never arrive. You never arrive. The joys in the journey.
And the phrase, so we actually have worked with now a number of people who are similar to what you just described, in the sense that they hit a point in life and they arrived, and they're no longer, as needing that paycheck. They maybe have some dollars they've socked away. Their desires have changed. They live on less money. They realize that's not where it is. And so we have helped a lot of people in that mid period, in that mid or halftime kind of thing, of age 50, 45, 55. And it's been really fascinating that they've been able now to say, you know what, this is what I've always wanted to do. Never thought I could do it. Didn't think I had permission to do it. Didn't think I could pull it off. And now here I am. And that is wonderful to watch. So,
Yeah. It And that thing too about passion and purpose, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on this, is that people think that that's the one thing and it's going to be fixed for the rest of your life. But a passionate purpose, again, I believe, is a moving target. It's an evolution of you as a human, and it's making sure that you, I think, continue to be aware of what that evolution of that passionate purpose is. What do you think about that?
That's an interesting thought. I just turned 60, and when you hit some of those milestones, you do kind of tend to look back. I remember early on when I first went through an exercise. This was probably back in the early 90s, so we're talking, 30 years ago. And I articulated that time, and I say it stayed with me for quite a while, that my passion was to grow groups of people, the larger the better.
Right.
So I just enjoyed taking one person or a small group and watching it explode. Mm-hmm. All right. That just, man, and God has gifted me with some intuitive ways. It's kind of like your true entrepreneurs, which there aren't, only 10 to 12% of your population is entrepreneurial. And the Uber ones are, less than that. They have a hard time telling you how they did what they did. Okay. They don't map it out. They just do it. And so that was kind of where I was for quite a while. In the network that we're in now, that I lead full time, and especially the training our training platform that we use, I get to work with the mom and pops. I get to work with the smaller, some of them multi-million dollars, some of them are just small groups that's all they kind of want. But to watch their passion and their purpose live out and live vicariously through them, incredibly fulfilling. So I would agree with you. There's still a growth part of me. I still like to see growth. I believe that churches should grow. They're designed to grow when they're done right, when the gospel is there. You and I we're designed to grow. When we're not, we're going, something's not working. So there's still the growth part of me, and there's still the people part of me. I think the larger the better is probably, I'm not putting so much weight in that. I'd rather work with lots of people, but whether or not the whole thing grows large for them, that's their call. So anyway, that's interesting thought.
So has it become more about the quality rather than the quantity?
Yeah, I think that's probably a good part. Although I think at times, especially in church circles, that's thrown out as an excuse for me not growing.
Okay.
Okay. And I'm like, come on, so it depends upon the context of that conversation that I'd have to decide where I fall.
Okay. Maybe both. All right.
Maybe both.
Okay, so step one's know your passion. Step two is get perspective. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, part of perspective is again yourself. It's also understanding what the mountain looks like and what you need to plan for, or what do you not know. Have you ever climbed a mountain before? What's the equipment you're going to need? Have you thought about that? I mean, so it's really to do some surveying isn't the correct word, almost be an audit, to do some auditing
Mhm.
of your experience and the context that you've been dropped into. And one of the things we always want to know is, have you ever started anything before? It could be
Mhm.
small, but have you ever started something? If you've never started anything, then we would recommend you not go big right out of the gap. But that whole perspective is a wisdom aspect as well that we drive you to. So
So you maybe could say gaining awareness of where you are and the landscape.
self-aware, context aware,
Yep.
and which again in Christian circles, a good missionary, you drop somebody into a new culture, the first thing they're going to do is spend a lot of time just getting to know that culture and understand it,
Okay.
and how does it work the way it works. So
Cool. Next step three is plan your steps. So,
yeah, so I started out, my college career was going to be an engineer, electrical engineer. I went to Texas A&M University. For those Aggies listening, whoop. And that's what I was going to do. But God had different ideas. I worked at Texas Instruments in college, and then through a series of awakening events, kind of things, said yes to my pastors who wanted me to become a pastor. But I brought all of that uh, organization, process oriented perspective of life. And then my first 2 years of being a pastor, I had a mentor who was a family systems counselor, and he trained me in family systems. And so systems and plans are what allow organic things to grow.
mhm.
So, if you're a solopreneur and you just want it to be small, fantastic. If you want it, however, to get some legs, and especially if you want other people to join you, you're going to have some administrative skeletons, processes, plans, because that allows people to know where to plug in and how to contribute. So the planning is critical. Now, again, the plan is going to, all be flexible. Once you hit the ground, it's all
Mm.
going to change, but at least you're hitting the ground with the roadmap of where you're trying to get. So
Cool. And that leads to step number four is you talked about people, enlisting people.
yeah, so I'm big on, it's interesting, Jeff, the churches that I served starting around a seminary were always larger churches, and I was always on a staff team.
Hmm.
So I was never, up until we started Crosspoint, I was never the only guy. I always thought, my wife and I thought we would go be missionaries in Mexico because the stepfather who raised me was Hispanic, Latino, and I love the culture. But as I got into ministry, I thought, man, they just drop you in, and I'd go nuts if I was all by myself. So by the grace of God, when we were asked to start this church in West Houston, I convinced the powers that be that we could have a line of credit and I could build a staff team, because I just didn't know what to do by myself. So our process is very big on team. Our process is very big on people and groups and how you recruit leaders. So my big thing is, if you're going to start something and you want a team, recruit leaders, don't recruit doers.
Mm.
So recruit leaders, they'll recruit doers. All right. But build that team of leaders who you can delegate to, you can entrust, who are going to help you own. They share your cause, they share your passion, but they don't share your gifts. They complement your gifts.
Mm.
So there's some very, very simple but wise ways to go about recruiting people. For instance, you can't recruit somebody if you don't know what you want them to do, right? I mean, they're going to go, well, what do I do? So if you haven't defined that, it's very hard to recruit somebody if you haven't defined for how long you want them to serve. Churches tend to say, hey, come do this. And then they forget about you and expect you to serve for 5 years or something. That doesn't work. So there are just some basics to how you're going to build that team. And you and I were designed to be in community. We're designed to be in relationship. And when we're in relationship around a cause, and especially, on from our perspective, a Christian cause where we're here to bring Jesus to the world in ways that change their lives for good, it's just incredibly fulfilling and rewarding. So,
yeah, it is very much. Making a difference is very rewarding, and getting feedback that you are making a difference is also very rewarding. You need to know, well, is it working? And that's
exactly right.
That's the feedback loop. Step 5 is practice and progress.
Yeah. So when people would ask us how we started this church in West Houston that went from 7 families to 1,600 and 3 locations, and I shared with them, I had been starting stuff as a pastor for 9 years. I mean, I was the youth guy, so we started a youth ministry, and then we started small groups, and we started a very contemporary worship service in a small dying community, and so I was constantly practicing starting things without really realizing that's what I was practicing for, right? So when all of a sudden it came, I'm 36 years old and we're going to start this church, and people believed in us and funded us. It wasn't my first rodeo. All right. Yeah. So that practice is very important for you. And if you're doing that in terms of starting, it has to do with your testing. It has to do with seeing if this is going to work or not. It's what everybody calls fail fast. We want you to fail fast. We don't want you to fail fatally, because if you fail fatally, chances are you had some goods, but now you're out of the game and you don't want to get back in the game. So that practice and that process, again, is going into it, as a prototype, as a beta, which also, by the way, allows you to have lots of freedom in what you want to do. If you call it a prototype, everybody's like, oh, okay, you can do, explore, do whatever. It just gives you some freedom, but it also lets you learn as you go, which is very critical. Yeah.
And learning from the doing, obviously.
Yes, a docent model of learning, right?
Yeah. My first career was as a secondary school teacher, and
okay, wow.
So I've essentially didn't enjoy it, and after a few years I decided to get out of that, and guess what, we almost look back and now I'm just a teacher.
That's exactly right. You're a teacher at heart. You're a teacher at heart. It's just, you change. And actually, probably most of the people on most of us, actually in the United States, the average reading level is I think it's gone down to 6th grade. So there you go. We're all a bunch of secondary students. You're teaching.
That's right. The next step, really important too, is continue to persevere. And of course, in any business startup, perseverance is a biggie.
Inc. did, they did a great short little video that we use actually in our training. And it was on why startups fail. Mm-hmm. And they asked a number of experts, what do you think, why do startups fail? What's the number one reason? And the tie was between, first of all, you don't have a customer. So it fails when you don't have anybody who wants what you want. And that's why church plants fail too. They have something nobody wants. But the second reason, the second reason, which is very true if you think about it, the second reason they fail is the founder gives up.
Yeah.
Okay. And now it's not saying that the founder just rides the boat into the ocean, but the founder is flexing, he or she, she's trying this, she's trying that, but she keeps pushing forward. Man, perseverance though, boy, you better have a good team around. You better have somebody holding up your arms. You better have somebody that has your back and is saying, go, go, go. This is why when we talk about faith, faith at the end of the day is trusting in something. It's trusting in something, trusting in someone. Uh, and so that's why it's so important. Is your faith internally? It's just trusting in you. That's a weird loop, or is it trusting in something else from which you can draw strength to persevere? Because perseverance, you're going to need it at some point, maybe sooner than later.
Exactly. And last step is start propagation. Explain that.
That's really a multiplying aspect of things. That's really a seeing the results. That's watching your passion take on flesh and come alive through whatever venture you're starting, right? And that's where we would also encourage you to be thinking. Part of your vision process is this a one and done, or is this something that we want to see? If it is bringing good, we want to see this thing replicated and moving out. So we like you to think about the end game, and we're always asking so 5 years from now, what do you want to become? What is this thing? What do you hope to see? What do you believe God, what do you believe Jesus wants you to do with this thing? And how's that going to have multiplied impact? Again, you may say, hey, you know what? I just care about my little block, and this is all I'm going to do. Fantastic. But have you thought it out? You may say, like one of the teams we've worked with, we want to be present in Detroit and Flint and Ann Arbor. They've already got grants through U of M, University of Michigan, wonderful, wonderful ministry to neonatal moms. And so just depends upon where you see that. But the point is, have you thought about it, and how are you going to see that success? What's that going to look like?
So really it's taking your idea and manifesting it and then multiplying it.
That's correct. That's correct.
So, what I love what you're doing, Bill, is your heart's in the right place. Your passion comes from within, and it's about making a difference. It's about raising the energy of the planet in a positive way, and I think that's awesome. And
thank you. I tell you, you mentioned persevere, and I'm glad you didn't ask for like personal stories. It's definitely hard at times, and you're constantly saying. There are a couple of scriptures that help me. One is Psalm 37 verse 4 that says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and seek the Lord with all your heart, and He'll give you the delights, the desires of your heart." And so, my focus, and this is what I tell people, is again, why are you doing this? You and I can't get away from some self-centered reason. We just can't escape that. That's how we are. But it's to keep those in check, to know they're there. But at the end of the game, what's the greater good that you're doing this for, and who are you serving? And so my peace comes from knowing, the God that's claimed me, who I'm serving. And at the end of the day, what's the worst thing that can happen? So what you fail, your identity is not in your failure. So much of the times we think it is. Your identity is also not in your success. So, where's that identity lying, and making sure it's grounded well, because you're going to have some tough times.
You are. And I think it's coming from the right place, and you're connected to your jet engine or your nuclear power plant. It makes it a lot easier. I love a quote by Wayne Dyer that I read recently. And he said that your job in life is to teach yourself, then teach others, and raise the energy of the planet. And I certainly, for me, I try to teach others what I have taught myself, or even what I need to learn.
Right.
And I write to learn as well. That's the other thing, is that because when you write, you've got to distill the noise into something that makes sense.
That's exactly true. You have to make it simpler than those chaotic thoughts in your head.
Yeah. And I remember a cousin who's a couple of years older than me used to say to me, "Jeff, you use too many big words." And he was right. I was using too many big words. So today I write for a grade 5. That's what I write for.
Okay. Yeah. Caveman simple.
Yeah, exactly, mate. So it's great. So just to finish off, you got a training course that helps people start faith-based businesses, and essentially it's a template for a startup or training for a startup. Tell us a little bit about that training that you do.
So, Jeff, our training is called Start New, and you can find it at startnewtraining, all one word.com. It teaches you how to build, fund, and launch ventures that help people.
Cool.
So the three pillars are build, fund, and launch. Our materials based around those three pillars. You're going to build, first of all, you're going to build yourself, your team.
Mm-hmm.
Then you're going to build your business or your venture. And then you're going to build your product or your offering, depending upon, the context you are. So what is it you're giving people? On the funding side, you're going to look at your cash flow. You're going to look at how you're raising funds. And again, is it fundraising through donation? Is it for profit? Depends upon where you're coming from with that. And on the launch side, you're going to talk about pitching. How do you pitch? Actually, for funding, that goes in there, but it also goes in the launch side. On the launch side, then we take you through a process on a 5-year, 3-year, 1-year, 90-day planning process.
Mm-hmm.
So you're constantly looking out there. And then also your community partnerships. One of the downfalls of the church in the West has been its self-reliance, as opposed to understanding God's already in the community. It's you joining him rather than you inviting him along on your mission. Mm-hmm. And so it's really discovering what's there. It kind of goes back to our seminal story, the feeding of the 5,000, which is the miracle where Jesus used 5 loaves and 2 fish. That's why we have the name FiveTwo in our network.
Okay.
He uses 5 loaves and 2 fish. He multiplies that to feed a crowd of 5,000 plus. Well, when he tells the apostles that they need to take care of the crowd, they come to him and say, you need to send the crowd away. There's too many people here. And he says, you give them something to eat. So he commands them. In the Greek, it's an imperative. And then they say, well, it's going to take a whole half a year's wages. Do you want to spend half a year on people we'll never see again? And, they've only missed one meal. They're not that hungry, yada, yada. And he says, go and see how many loaves and fish you have. So he commands them to go back into the community. That's one of our principles, is who are those partners? Who's already doing stuff in the community? And usually if you're starting a venture to help people in a community, there's a good chance other people have thought about it. You're probably not a brand new idea. Mm-hmm. But what has always been missing is who's going to do it. Mm-hmm. And the church and Christians, if they'll realize that what's often missing is someone taking charge and saying, I'm going to be this, the spear point. I'm going to lead this thing. Then all of a sudden you start to see resources come around you. You start to hear of other people. So that community partnerships on the launch side of things is very important for your success. We take you through that. And then we also take you through a couple of modules, a couple of video sessions on how to pivot and how to be really aware of where you need to be going. So build, fund, and launch ventures that help people. 12 modules, about 50 some odd videos, short, 4 to 8 minutes each for adults. That's what we have on our startnewtraining.com site.
Very cool. So just to wind it up then, Bill, it's been a fabulous conversation. We've gone down a few rabbit holes.
I like rabbit holes.
Yeah. What's some advice that you would like to offer, because you're now a wise man? Because you're
since I hit 60, huh?
What word of advice or word ideas we could leave with the audience today?
It's a wonderful question. As we've been talking, I probably would use the word who. There's a lot of famous leadership stuff on why, and I get that, and I believe in that. But I would say who. So, first of all, is know who you are. There's a real understanding of who, and then secondly, I would say know who you're trying to serve. Okay. But the last one I would say is most critical, and that is know whose you are and who are you following, whose authority are you under. That's that spiritual side. that is so critical in your life. So I I just think about that who, who has God made me? Who is my God? Who is he calling me to serve? It's always around the who, and that works.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to maybe catching up in real life once.
That'd be awesome.
Once we can fly out of Australia, and
once Americans can fly into Australia. So there's another.
Exactly. So thank you very much, Bill. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks, Jeff.